Hey guys, Dusty here. I'm a little late to the party when it comes to the Nike Super Shoes, but I finally broke down and bought myself a pair of the Nike NEXT. So this video will be a first impressions review after my first run. So let's get to it. First run in the NEXT%'s done, and it was a very wet, very windy, very muddy 13K with an average pace of 4:05 a kilometer, 124 meters of elevation gain, and an average heart rate of 151 beats per minute. Alright, so where to start with the NEXT%? I've bought many shoes over the past year, including I believe 3 carbon fiber plated shoes, and none of them really lived up to the experience that I was hoping to get. So I finally just said, screw it, I'm gonna get myself one of the Nike Super Shoes. The whole world can't be wrong when everybody is saying how amazing these shoes are. And they're right. As soon as I put this shoe on my foot and took my first few steps around my house, it was very obvious what the whole Nike Super Shoe world is all about. Because as soon as you start walking around and you're about 2/3 through your push off, it's very obvious that the shoe just really wants to snap you forward. And to be honest, I can't believe I waited for so long to get myself a pair of these. So for those of you that haven't seen the many other NEXT% reviews out there, let's go over some of the stats. The NEXT% has an 8mm drop, and my men's size 8.5 weighs in at 6.4 ounces or 182 grams. And the Nike NEXT% does fit true to size. So all of my other race shoes are 8.5, and that was no exception with my NEXT%. Alright, let's talk about the upper, which is basically a piece of plastic. Nike calls this upper vapor weave. And this upper is very thin. You can actually see right through it. It has no stretch whatsoever, so I did find it was a little more difficult than other shoes when you're just putting your foot into them. Once you put your foot in, at least for myself, it was quite comfy. The NEXT% features this asymmetrical lacing, which I find I was able to cinch up quite tightly because it wasn't putting pressure on the top of my foot. It was putting it more to the side, which is nice. Now this fabric is supposed to be somewhat water resistant. However, on my run, there were just so many huge puddles. Within a minute, my feet were completely soaked. So I just had to commit to my feet being wet the whole time in my first run in the NEXT%. I know some people have complained about some slight heel slippage in this shoe. I personally didn't have any. It does have a bit of foam here in the heel collar, and the heel collar does feature a little bit of rigidity as well. So very interesting upper. I've never seen this sort of material in a shoe before, and overall I don't really have any complaints about it. I did notice when I stepped in my first puddle and my feet instantly became soaked, that the shoe didn't retain much or if any of that water. So that's a huge plus if you're running a marathon and it's wet out. You're wearing a traditional running shoe, it's going to increase in weight quite substantially when it gets wet. So that's definitely a plus in the upper column when it comes to this vapor weave upper. Okay, now we move on to something that makes this shoe very special, the ZoomX foam. So this midsole is very soft and cushiony. I believe it's probably also the reason that these shoes don't typically last a lot of runners very long. And I've never ran in a shoe that feels this soft, that weighs less than 7 ounces in my men's size 8.5. That's crazy. And then of course sandwiched inside this foam is a full-length carbon plate, which makes this shoe ultra stiff. And when you combine that plate with Nike's ZoomX foam, that's how you get a shoe that's faster than any other shoe out there. Okay, let's move on to the outsole. Very decent amount of rubber here, especially on the forefoot. There are also 2 strips of rubber here on the heel. And actually, looking at it now, I have a couple of spots on the outsole after my run. I must have just stepped on a sharp rock, but yeah, there is some wear there already after 8 miles. I'm sure the midsole foam is going to wear out before the rubber on the bottom does. Alright, so let's talk about how the shoe felt while I was running in it. First of all, when I pulled it out of the box and was just looking at it, I couldn't believe how narrow it is in the middle of the shoe here. So I haven't read any reviews about it, but if you have a really wide foot, I'm not sure this would work for you in the middle of the shoe. It's going to probably feel very tight for you. I thought this would actually feel narrow for myself, but once I got my foot in the shoe, it felt fine. And there is ample room in the forefoot. You can see it does flare out on the sides here, which does add quite a bit of stability when you're running. And from my experience, just walking around in the shoe, I found it quite unstable. But as soon as I started running in it, I felt stable. I didn't feel like I had any issues cornering. It was decently grippy on the wet road that I was running on. Mind you, I was mostly going in a straight line. And I definitely took the Next Percent through all sorts of environments for its first run. We went through it was raining, there were tons of puddles, I went through mud, I ran a little bit on trail. So definitely not ideal, but this shoe can handle that if you have a little bit of that in your runner race. And I'll have to do a more in-depth review when I start putting some more miles on the Next Percents. But overall, my first impressions would be, I think if you had 2 runners who are of equal fitness, and they're both in a race, and one's wearing a Next Percent, or a 4% or an Alpha Fly, and the other person isn't, then that other person is more than likely going to lose. There is 100% an advantage to running with these shoes. I wasn't quite sure if I believe that or not, especially after buying a few other carbon fiber plated shoes. Thought there's maybe a little bit of an advantage, but after putting the Nikes on, hands down, no questions about it, it's a fast shoe. Another thing that I should mention is that after I did my run, my legs had 0 soreness whatsoever. And if I had done the same run in one of my racing flats or even another carbon plated shoe like the Meta Racer, I'd probably have a little bit of soreness or tiredness right now. And yeah, when you're running in the shoe, it wants to go fast. I tried running at some easier paces today, and I just kept looking down at my watch and seeing about 6:30 per mile, so I just kind of held it. Kind of strayed away from my original plan of doing 2x2 miles. So I ran a little bit harder than kind of what my easy pace should have been, but I ran a little bit slower than kind of what my usual tempo pace would be. So I don't think I could replicate those sort of paces with any other shoe other than this, at least at the effort that I put out today. So ultimately, if you're a competitive runner or you're just someone who wants to improve on your best time and you're willing to spend, well, quite a bit extra on a shoe, because the Next Percent comes in at $330 Canadian or $250 US. If you're willing to get a pair, then you're definitely going to be giving yourself your fullest potential come race day. So I hope you liked my first impressions review, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.